Are you speaking of Jason and the Argonauts? You're not, but that's a way to link it to the next review.
That is a linking device, certainly, and I will use it because I can't currently think of one. Okay. His inclusion here, when his work only made up a part of the films in which it featured, may be considered something of a fudge, but no discussion of stop motion could be considered representative of the art form without the mention of Ray Harryhausen, whose pioneering special effects work and memorable characters meant that he was often the name most associated with the films in which he worked, with the film's actual director often relegated to second or lower place in the minds of the audience. Therefore, including him in this podcast wasn't difficult, but picking what to include was. Our initial thought was Clash of the Titans, probably the most famous film that he worked on, but I watched that and, well, it's not great. Sam Worthington's performance in the terrible remake actually looks somewhat better in comparison, having now seen, as an adult, Harry Hamlin struggling to act more realistically than any of Harryhausen's creations. There's also not as much of Harryhausen's work in it as a lot of earlier stuff, and almost none at all in the first hour. Plus, for a 1981 film, the style felt decidedly archaic. That left any number of the Harryhausen films I remember from my childhood, usually broadcast on a bank holiday on BBC Two, or I think Channel 4 on a Sunday morning. The first springing to mind being the Sinbad trilogy. However, that would involve watching and talking about films where any number of white people have big roles, particularly that of Sinbad, Sinbad, the sailor from Baghdad, and talking about Jane Seymour as an Arab, and Tom Baker as an Arab. So, no. Instead, we chose 1963's Jason and the Argonauts, based on the Greek myth and one of Ray Harryhausen's most popular films, and indeed his personal favourite. Pelias overthrows the Greek kingdom of Thessaly, killing the king and two of his children. Before she dies, one of the children pleads for help from the goddess Hera. Honor Blackman, who in this film I did not dislike, so that's a remarkable first. And so Hera pledges to help the remaining child, Jason, to reclaim his kingdom when he's a man. At such time, Hera puts Jason in Pelias' path, though his identity is at that point unknown to Jason. Pelias is not similarly unaware of identity though, and knowing that he cannot kill Jason by his own hand, lest he invite his own downfall, he encourages Jason in his plans to sail across the known world and capture the Golden Fleece of Colchis, a gift from the gods and symbol of kingship. To this end, Jason instructs the great shipwright Argus to build him a ship, and well, that's what shipwrights do, and recruits a crew, among whom are Pelias' son Acastus, a saboteur, and the legendary Heracles, though here going by Hercules, his Roman name, which is unimportant, but if I didn't point out the error, I wouldn't be me. And then begins his voyage. After that, the film follows a fairly standard swords and sandals structure, but is set apart by a score by, surprisingly, Bernard Herrmann, though weirdly it feels about 20 years out of place for a 1963 film, and, of course, Ray Harryhausen's stop-motion creatures, most notable of which are the giant automaton Talos and the skeletal warriors that are commanded to defend the fleece. Stop-motion special effects can often seem quaint now, or even simply antiquated, but they were the only way to achieve a huge range of effects in films for a long time, and the best of them can be just as effective, or more, than modern techniques, in terms of entertainment anyway. CGI has created wonderful worlds and characters, but too often is used too much, and their brains shut down. There are 11 billion soldiers in this curiously medieval-style battle at the end of the climax of Avengers Endgame. Nope. That's how my mind works anyway. One of the many, many things George Lucas doesn't seem to understand about his own films is the appeal of something that we know is really there. A butthurt Lucas, on creating a fully digital Yoda, moaned about moaning, and asked how a digital puppet was any different from a latex one. And, while we ought to be careful how much attention we pay to the complaints of Star Wars fans in general, here the moaning was justified, because it is different. Beyond the committed performances of Frank Oz and Mark Hamill that sold the character, Yoda was clearly a physical thing. He was there, and our brains know the difference. So it is with stop-motion special effects. That's an odd emphasis. So it is with stop-motion special effects, and while there is a huge range of quality and effectiveness, the best stuff still works in context. And I don't exaggerate when I say that, model though it is, Ed 209 still has the power to put chills through me. And Jason the Argonauts is a fine example. Certainly the matting can be a bit ropey and inconsistent, but I'd watch the fight between the Argonauts and the skeleton warriors over the slick but soulless end of a modern superhero movie any day of the week. It's not all brilliant. The Hydra and drone man pushing polystyrene rocks as if he were a giant don't fare so well, but the tail-off section is great, and Harryhausen's design has that same quality as Star Wars C-3PO, that of the neutral face that can cause us to read emotion into it where none exists, thanks to context. In this case, in particular, with sadness and shock while the character dies. In the end, I'd say Jason the Argonauts is a very good entry point if you're new to Ray Harryhausen, and perhaps wondered why the makers of Monsters Incorporated or Corpse Bride felt compelled to acknowledge him in their films.
Yes, I hadn't seen this in an awfully long time, since probably I was in before my teens. And,
yeah, certainly.
And I kind of wish I'd gone back to it at some point because I really enjoyed it. It's a lot of fun in a way that a lot of modern films just can't seem to get a handle on. It's just fun. There's obviously we're mainly here to talk about Harryhausen, but even just before we get to that, the rest of the film around it is really well structured with nice characters who I can get behind, and most of it works. It kind of makes sense. And the effects is Harryhausen stuff, for the most part, is great. I think, the Hydra's not perhaps his high point, but the rest of it, I think for the most part, works incredibly well. Talos is great. I think all that sequence is fabulously fantastic. And the skeleton army fight is as effective as any modern bit of effects work that I've seen, which sounds like a strange thing to say, but it just actually works. You actually kind of can be suckered into the fact that there's actually a person fighting something else. Obviously, that something else is not realistic because it's a skeleton, but as opposed to most modern fight sequences, which tends to be a CG representation of one person fighting a CG representation of another person rather than two real people fighting, then it actually feels a lot more real than most modern blockbusters, which is a crazy thing to say, but that's what it is. It works really well, and the effects actually enhances the story greatly. I hugely enjoyed this, and was really enjoyed going back to this film. Can't think what else to add that would just be repeating what you're already saying there, Drew. This Harryhausen's work, particularly in this one, if this is his favourite, then this is a fairly worthy candidate of it. I enjoyed all of this. There's a few oddities to the pieces as a whole. It strays a bit from the source material, but then again, Greek myths are always kind of loose in terms of what you can be used to interpret from, so I don't think that's really too much of an issue. And there's obviously a lot of ADR. I didn't actually realise that the actor that's playing Jason his voice actor is completely different to his physical actor.
I found that out this afternoon.
I did not realise that at all. I think in part because basically the entire script, as far as I can tell, everything in it is ADR'd, so it all sounds a bit... It doesn't sound like it's obviously desynced from his voice because everyone else is doing it as well. Even the person that was voice acting and physical actor were the same, so I didn't actually notice it. That was something I learned the other day there as I was looking up this film. Hadn't realised that at all, and quite a sad tale to that actor. Now I come to think about it, so we won't focus on that. As a film, Jason the Argonauts was a lot of fun to revisit, and I would heartily recommend that anyone who hasn't seen it already give it a go, and it's a great family film as well. Want to introduce the kids to, I think, as well, who will appreciate this a lot. Heartily love it.
This is definitely going down as a very pleasant surprise, because I watched it for the special effects, for the Ray Harryhausen stuff, and I couldn't really tell you exactly which character was in which thing. I have memories of so much Ray Harryhausen stuff from my childhood, and it's the characters that stand out. And if you'd asked me a week ago to like tell you which film the Skeleton Warriors were in, I would probably have told you Clash of the Titans.
Yeah.
So it's they're all kind of muddled. Like I wouldn't have known which one was which.
Yeah.
Like I knew that The Rock, that's ROC, not Dwayne Johnson, was in the Sinbad films because that's from Sinbad. But beyond that, I wouldn't have known.
Yeah.
So now watching this, actually, it's quite good because it is a coherent story, and the fact it's like the characters do make sense in this. In some of them, they're a bit more scattershot.
Yeah.
Because there are Greek things in the Sinbad things, and there's also Kali, the Hindu goddess, in one of the Sinbad films as well. Because it's like picking and choosing what they liked.
Yeah, pretty much.
And you were saying about the straying a bit from the Greek myth, but at the same time, that's from originally an oral tradition, and there are probably a dozen at least different versions of any given Greek myth.
Yeah.
There's no canonical version because no one person wrote them, so it doesn't really matter that it's not quite how it was spoken about 3,000 years ago.
Yeah.
But one of the reasons that Ray Harryhausen thinks that people like it so much is because it's one of the most complete films, which I think is fair too, because it has a story, beginning, middle, end. It does actually have a conclusion, even though it's kind of and maybe more things will happen now at the end of it.
Yeah.
It does feel that whereas other films of his seem to be a bit messy. I say films of his, they're not his films, that's the thing. Yes. He didn't direct any of them.
Yes.
He just did the special effects work on them, but it's him that gets remembered. I've watched this now, I've researched Jason the Argonauts now. I still can't tell you the directors. I've forgotten again for the fourth time today. But yeah, it's really fun. It's definitely safe for the family. And yeah, where you can see it, the Skeleton Warriors, modern technology would allow that to be more cleanly matted. Yeah. And that's the only change I would want to make. Because those characters have character.
Yes.
And it feels, and suspension of disbelief is a difficult term to use in this because I'm never thinking, oh, well, that's real. But they're so in the film and so good that it's not like I'm thinking, oh, that's really there. It's more I know it's not there. I don't care. I'm really enjoying it.
Yeah.
And there's just so much fun. So this is a really pleasant surprise because I was thinking, we'll talk about that. And is this one of the films that has the wee dinosaurs? That's perhaps one of the more famous Ray Harryhausen things is the dinosaurs portrayed as they used to be before scientists and archaeologists wised up and that they don't actually stand upright. Yeah. And fighting each other. And I was kind of saying, just to think about that sort of thing. But no, actually, as it works as a whole, and then the special effects, as they should do in the best of stuff, help to tell the story. Yeah. And aren't a thing in their own, even though they are very memorable, of course, because they're so distinctive. But they're actually doing the right thing. They're telling the story.
Yes.
And it's a very enjoyable story.
Yeah, survived a few thousand years and this didn't ruin it, so well done. Well done to all involved.